Marlene Dietrich! Yes, the real Marlene Dietrich, 64 years old, and perspiring profusely after 2 hours of continuous singing, patted one of my cheeks with her glistening fingers. "Ah, oh, the child in you," she said, before gently patting my other cheek. "The child in you." Then, turning to the small tear-stained crowd of besotted fans gathered round her backstage at the Golders Green Hippodrome, she whispered, "Oh, listen to the child." The crowd oohed and ahed, then sighed, not at the dumb question I'd asked her, but at the wisdom of her reply. But the bon mot that had so moved Marlene Dietrich's fans didn't in any way move the editor of the John London gossip column the next morning. "John London can reminisce about Miss Dietrich's past," said John London in chief, "or John London can speculate about Miss Dietrich's future. But I will not tolerate Miss Dietrich patting John London on the cheek, then telling him he's a child." Pulling quite a face, he spiked my brilliant story on the spike he always kept next to his sit-up-and-beg Remington typewriter. My even more brilliant story is that in the summer of 1965, during the holiday between my second and third year at university, I'd somehow wangled my way into a 6-week holiday job as a gossip writer on the London Evening News. Yes, the London Evening News, lodged right in the heart of hallowed Fleet Street. I have to say that the Marlene Dietrich rejection, coming as it did on my third day on the job, really hurt. But such was the pace of the newspaper trade, it was soon forgotten. Within 1 hour of the boss's reprimand, my mind was far from that smoky voice in Golders Green, and far from that perspiring, world-famous personage. As the county of Middlesex became the county of Oxfordshire, my second-hand, souped-up Mini Cooper was hurtling me on my way towards the Henley Regatta. I'd been given 3 hours, including travel time, in which to file 300 words on the watery event for the newspaper's first edition. My deadline, not to be missed, was 1:15 p.m. Arriving at noon, I was armed only with a portable typewriter, last year's evening news enclosure badge, and no knowledge of, but instinctive dislike of, regattas. Paying for a ticket to park in a field full of brand-new Bentleys, putting my well-used Mini Cooper to shame, jostled by a stream of haw-haws, dressed to the nines in striped blazers crowding through the narrow entrance, at which I had to pay as the evening news credentials I'd been given were last year's. Then, discovering I had to pay for another ticket for access to the riverbank, I phoned my boss in London. "Did you mean it when you said I could be as rude as I liked about this, event?" I asked him. The temporary phone line wasn't too clear. "So long as it makes good copy," said John London in chief impatiently. Then he shouted, "Go ahead! Write whatever you want." So, sitting cross-legged on a damp patch of grass while the haw-haws milled around me, venom poured from my typewriter. Clackety-click, clackety-click, 300 words, no problem. Without even bothering to read it through, I dictated it, with relish, to the copy-taker down 50 miles of telephone cable back in Fleet Street. The piece landed on the John London desk, apparently with 2 minutes to spare. I stayed on a bit, hoping to at least enjoy the free press lunch, but, on being refused entry to the press tent because of my out-of-date credentials, I jumped into my car and headed back to London, pausing only near Hammersmith Tube to pick up the first edition of the Evening News from a newsstand. It had only just been delivered, so fresh that it was still warm from the presses. And what gratification did I find? Right across the top of page 3 was splashed my first ever headline, "You even need a ticket to row." Bliss! My 300 words, intact, uncut, unchanged, blasted that aquatic bastion of British conservatism into oblivion, or so I thought. Hooray, my Marlene Dietrich boo-boo was already history. One of the greatest thrills of the job was returning to the Evening News offices after filing by phone, just in time to see the monster presses roar into life in the basement. There they were, thousands of copies of my story, flying off the rollers into the hands of scurrying men, bundling them into yellow Bedford vans, engines running, ready to break speed limits across the city to catch their own delivery deadlines. At such moments the rest of the newspaper ceased to exist. My 85-word snippets, even about boring stuff, let's say the Secretary's Fair at Caxton Hall, perhaps the most boring story of all, shone through each copy like a laser beam. There was novelty every day, every single day. Right, nip along to Dirty Dick's. It's lunch with Anne Sidney. You know, she's the reigning Miss World, was a typical John London in chief command, usually delivered with his eyes firmly fixed on his Remington. Or, Lord's cricket ground this morning, Eton versus Harrow, give it a good bashing. Or, tonight you're covering the banquet for the President of Chile. If you haven't got the gear, kit out at Mossbros. We've got an account. Or, drop in at the garden party this afternoon. Make sure you get within 2 feet of any royal, however minor, then earwig as if your life depended on it. Or, pub crawl tonight with the All-American Baseball Stars team. You'll like that. Or, want the good news? You've got a reserved box at the Royal Ballet this evening. The bad news? Hang around the stage door after the show and get a couple of printable lines from Rudolph. Know who I mean? Mr. Nureyev. Routine became 5-minute chit-chats with the likes of Lulu at the Marquee about how she was going to celebrate her forthcoming 17th birthday, and Wall of Sound genius Phil Spector at Ronnie Scott's about the follow-up to the Righteous Brothers' You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin'. Member of Parliament and occasional muse Quintin Hogg at the House of Commons about his poetry writing. Even Julie Christie, yes, Julie Christie herself, in her suite at the Savoy, the interview involving a most embarrassing personal incident I simply cannot bring myself to describe. I had doors open to everything and for everything. No part of the swinging London social scene was complete without this swinging student gossip monger. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that, while I was only one of several John Londons taking the big city by storm, several William Hickeys from the Daily Express and Ephraim Hardcastles from the Daily Mail were queering my pitch elsewhere. But I'm 100% certain that none of my rivals ever danced with the legendary Diana Dors at the Ad Lib Club, that is, after I took the blonde firebrand out for dinner at, would you believe, Scott's, the poshest restaurant in town. On the London Evening News expense account, of course.